Hello, I'm Jake Collins, and this is the 8th and final episode of Knightmare Series 1. I love this opening, the colours, the monster, the trees, the horse and rider, the jump over the ravine, the ride up to the castle, past the prisoner, behind cell bars. Wonderful stuff. Really gets you in the right mood for Knightmare. I love the music that goes with the original series 1 to 3 opening as well. When I first rewatched the first episode of series 1 in March 1996 and heard the music again, I couldn't believe it was the same music that I'd heard all those years ago, after having not heard it for so long and heard other music on later episodes of Knightmare instead. But then it got to the bit with the horse jumping over the ravine. You get the wow, and I was like, yes, that was it, and this is it. I'm not really a fan of these dungeon ditties that rhyme very badly. Some of them are quite fun, some of them are quite informative. Some of them are very cringe. Some of them are not at all informative, and there's a lot of middle ground as well. It's certainly more useful in later series, coming in with a recap of who the team are and where they're up to in the quest. And there are different degrees of how useful that is as the show goes on, as I'm sure I'll mention in later commentaries. Here we are with the final team of the series, Richard, Jonathan, Paul and Edward from West Yorkshire. When I first watched this episode on video, which was late 1999, I thought, well, I know they're going to get to level 3 and showcase level 3 finally in this episode. But if Richard's going to hang around being very badly directed in the Hall of Spears the whole time, how on earth are they going to have time to get that far? And indeed, the person who really is messing up this challenge is advisor Jonathan Morley from Normanton in West Yorkshire. And as I've noticed in more recent years while watching this episode, it's really him that messes up the entire quest. Very luckily, the spears stop just as Richard finally rushes into their path there. That's a production thing, like not being able to have the letters disappear with Sesame and Maeve. You can't make it look like the Dungeoneer is behind the drawn spears once he's run past them. So you have to stop them in this case, which is slightly better than what they've done the 2 previous times, make them completely disappear. If it was up to Edward Halliwell, Kippax, West Yorkshire, I rather think this team wouldn't have made the fatal mistake later in this episode and would have won at the end of the series, bringing a victorious end as was hoped for and planned, I think it's fair to say, by Tim Child and friends in the production office. Certainly they wanted to showcase level 3, and not being sure whether they're going to get another series of Knightmare, wouldn't it be nice to have a winner before the end? The teams, as I mentioned in the previous commentary, have been making disappointingly slow and faltering progress. And really, Richard's quest is designed to be a winning quest. For one thing, they've been shown the videos of what all the other teams have been doing wrong. It's something you realise more and more as you watch Knightmare over the years. The team's progress and end result is partly to do with how well they're playing the game. It's also a lot to do with whether Tim Child thinks it would be a good idea to have a winner at this stage, perhaps have a winner at this stage, not have a winner at this stage, how many new little tricks and traps and puzzles and characters and scenarios he wants to try out on them before he gets in a team he thinks is going to be better on camera. It really is all part of the mix of making Knightmare. And this is obvious to varying degrees when you first watch the show, but it's pretty obvious that this lot are being encouraged to get through quite a long way, and indeed win. And I don't think it's too much to say they're really being handed the quest on a silver platter. That battle of insults with Polly and Cedric at the end of the previous episode really is their free ticket through to level 3. I can't stand watching that battle of insults anymore. I find it totally cringe, and I don't really like that it's sucking any challenge out of the quest. But yes, as I say, thanks to Jonathan Morley from Normanton in West Yorkshire, they're not going to win anyway. And indeed, if we think of the other two teams that have got this far in Series 1, Danny's team and Simon's team before that, in both cases, if advisors had been listened to who weren't listened to, I think we'd have been able to showcase level 3 already, and perhaps even help one of those two teams through to victory already. One thing Simon and particularly Danny did show in their quests is that the moving keyhole challenge is particularly awkward, and really it might be better just to stick in this random door for Casper to unlock here. Not such an interesting room, quite a boring little unlock the door thing here. I remember in the early days of the Knightmare website, Nicholas Lamb was very unimpressed with this scene. This locked door has been stuck here just so that Casper can open it. But really, on the whole, I'd rather watch this scene than particularly Danny's moving keyhole. And I think Simon's as well, because even though the moving keyhole is a nice idea, it's rather impractical and horrendously awkward on the screen. Yes, with Simon's team, the spellcaster advisor was very nearly able to get them into level 3. All he needed to say was NVIL after spellcasting A, and they'd have been in level 3, showcasing that in episode 4 of the series, Bish Bash Bosh, Bob's your uncle. But no, he listened to less wise advisors, as I said last time, looking for tricks that aren't really there. Dispelled Lantern and doomed Simon to death at the hands of Gibbet. Similarly with Danny. It's only one advisor who wants to go the wrong way, left, after Polly's door riddle. And he gets chastised for making the wrong decision by his teammates. And yet, still, the wrong decision has been made, and so yet again, we are deprived level 3. But here, finally, in episode 8, it's been made absolutely sure we're not going to be deprived of level 3. Or indeed, of the third appearance in the 8-episode series of Casper and Merlin. As I mentioned before, we're trying to get in a bit of variety here later in the series in familiar rooms that we've seen before, so we haven't got the block puzzle with Merlin. We've got this listening key to move into the keyhole M space on the back of Merlin's chair. A nice little idea, but again, very awkward on screen, largely thanks to how badly Richard's team get to grips with it, or fail to get to grips with it. until Casper talks them through it bit by bit. One of the things that really struck me early on when I was 4 and 5 and 6 about Knightmare and what I really liked about it was Merlin. I used to really enjoy his appearances and his runs steeped in magic and mystery and atmosphere. And I think, in many ways, Merlin is at his best here in Series 1. His appearances are rather long drawn out. They get snappier later on. But to underline the significance of this point in the quest, you've managed to reach Merlin about halfway through level 2, which is a great achievement in itself. But if you're going to stand any chance of getting further than that, you've got to come away from Merlin with some sort of reward, and that's what he's designed to be, a kind of signpost. You've done well, but you'll have to do better if you're going to do really well. And I've always enjoyed seeing Merlin being used in that way, him having that significance, and it's very, very palpable here in the first series. At other times, it does kind of peter out for various reasons, where that aspect of Merlin, that significance of Merlin, is at its second best, I would say, is in Series 3. The significance of the steps room and questions from Merlin, but I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the future. But in this first series, where the whole dungeon is steeped in mystery, this Hall of Folly, Merlin's room, Merlin's questions, feels very significant and is very significant. And I do particularly like the atmosphere of these early Merlin scenes. He's wearing his hat in this scene. He only wears his hat 2 other times, once in Series 2 and once in Series 4, and I don't like Merlin's hat, so I prefer it if he's not wearing that. But I do love the flowing green and yellow robes, the flowing white hair, and John Woodnutt's performance really drew me into the whole Merlin aspect of the show. And he was perhaps the thing I most strongly associated with Knightmare. All the time he was in the show. Treguard was always there, of course. I must have strongly associated him with the show. But I guess one can think of Treguard as kind of part of the furniture, and Merlin as something you don't see every week, but it's a particularly exciting and significant scene when you do see him. Actually, if you pick any episode at random from the first 4 series, there's exactly a 50% chance that Merlin will be in it or won't be in it. Because he's in half the episodes in Knightmare's first half. I mentioned Gibbet earlier. Here he is again. Alec Westwood without his Folly makeup on. And I will be getting round to talking about Folly on my next commentary, don't worry about that. Also using his natural Scottish accent for Gibbet. But this time, very easily, he accepts the password which Cedric gave to Richard at the end of the last episode, for reasons we won't go into. No real threat from Gibbet this time. But hang on. Didn't Merlin just give Richard a spell called Shield? Where's the opportunity to use that before the end of level 2? There has been some confusion over the years about carrying spells to different dungeon levels to be used there. It's not part of Knightmare, the TV show. Dave Morris adapted the rules so that it was part of the Choose Your Own Adventure section in the first Knightmare book. And after that, the Choose Your Own Adventure sections didn't really have levels as such, and you could carry any spell any distance anyway. But on the TV show, spells are for the level you are in, even if they have to make a kind of excuse. Oh, Mildred hasn't sent you to level 2, despite the fact you've gone down a wellway. You're still on level 1 in the monster's stomach, so when you use the spell that you've just been given, you're actually still on level 1 using it. Bit awkward, that. So there really is some kind of missing scene there. Don't know if they filmed it or just didn't bother filming it. Really cut for time, where there would have been, should have been, an opportunity to use Merlin's shield spell. But no, we're carrying on, we're forging ahead into level 3. We're forgetting all about that shield spell. And we probably are, aren't we, the first time round, because it's exciting, new stuff. We're finally getting to see the whole new world of level 3. And it's about time, quite frankly. The atmosphere of the 3rd level here is very much kind of isolated, very dark, very gloomy. You really get the sense that Richard is on his own, far down below the earth, surrounded by who knows what. And really, that's a lot of what makes Knightmare great. It's these primal fears that the dungeon locations bring out in us. And being in this interactive adventure with the Dungeoneer and the team as they play through in these environments is exciting, thrilling, nerve-wracking, and brilliant. Certainly it was for me at 4 years old. And it was for viewers who were more like the target audience range as well. I mentioned in the first commentary about creatures in the darkness being the cause of the first Dungeoneer, David's death. And that's a lot of what is scary about early Knightmare. Not quite knowing what's hanging around threatening the Dungeoneer and what's going to pick them off at any moment. It could be unknown creatures in the darkness. It could be something that you can see more clearly what's going on the screen, like the bomb that killed Danny, for instance. But the tension in the atmosphere is absolutely brilliant, and that's really what makes the show work. Of course, as I've realised in more recent years, it's designed to be watched once, so you get those raw feelings, and that's what sticks with you. If you do watch Knightmare over and over again, analyse it, pick it to pieces, it does kind of lose something of the childish wonder and horror, inevitably. Unlike most shows, Knightmare was never repeated on CITV. It must have been very expensive to make, and yet it was only ever shown once. A lot of the time, particularly in level 3, the team aren't really actually in any danger. A lot of the time, level 3 is the least complicated with the littlest for the team to actually do to win, but it's also the most atmospheric and makes the most impression on us, particularly as we see it far less often than levels 1 and 2. And that's a point I hope I'll remember to come back to when I talk about level 3 in Series 3, later in this series of commentaries. Richard has had certain things to do on this level. He's managed to cheer up the gargoyle and get the spell opposite there, fine, but of course the one actual, real decision the team had to make was made wrongly by Jonathan Morley from Normanton in West Yorkshire. As Edward says at the Wall of Jericho, we needed the horn. You knew that, Edward. Everybody knew that except Jonathan Morley, who persuaded Richard to take the dagger. They took the sniff bottle correctly and used it against the cavern whites, which is quite nice. The only time something's really actually physically done about cavern whites on Knightmare, which is good to see. But yeah, for goodness sake, why take the dagger? If that's not against the adventurer's code, I don't know what is. Don't take weapons, assume them to be the weapons of your enemy, unless there's another clue that you should take them. And there wasn't. There's the quest on a silver platter, and the quest has now come crumbling down, ironically, because the wall did not come crumbling down. And they'll be hoping to get another series, if only to show off that disappearing wall effect, with all the painstakingly drawn individual different stages of bricks disappearing that David Rowe had to do. By the way, I personally have absolutely no doubt that had they managed to bring the wall down, they would have been confronted by Mogdred, so he would actually have appeared in Series 1 as planned in the end, and used the gargoyle's opposite spell to turn him into Merlin, which is why Merlin's always going on about him being the dark side of my nature and of my magic. You don't want that. You want the opposite, Merlin, who then tells you you've completed the dungeon and won the quest. That was the plan, but Jonathan Morley spoiled it. Richard, Jonathan, Paul and Edward, you're our champions for now, but yeah, you don't really deserve it, particularly Jonathan. I always remembered this farewell, or the kind of atmosphere it created, Treguard assuring us that someday Knightmare will return, and I was certainly very glad to hear that. And whenever it did return, well, I started to feel that life was worth living again. This episode was first broadcast on the 26th of October 1987. We had to wait until the 5th of September 1988 for more Knightmare, but yes, in the end, it was well worth the wait. Thank you for joining me for this commentary. Hopefully you'll join me again next time for the third in this series of 16 commentaries on Knightmare, as I talk about Series 2, Episode 7.